So, lecture 2. Well, I was thinking today, maybe now I'll talk a bit about some of the aspects that were discussed in the class. So, this is a revision of lecture 2 now, and well, again, nice sunshiny day. Yeah. So, where were we? The ways in which ownership is acquired, and of course, this is a bit different from what was discussed in the previous lecture, so keep that in mind. Number one is succession, and well, with succession, as defined over here, it's basically a situation where the person who has deceased, the owner of the property, has deceased without making a will. So there are certain aspects to be careful about. Very importantly, even as in the class I had explained, a person who is responsible for causing the death of the property owner is not eligible to succeed to that to the deceased person's property. Yeah, so there are some of these things to be careful about. Gift, and we have looked at gift in different aspects. Remember, we also had a discussion about the engagement ring. Well, that would fall in the definition of a gift. Will. Now, wills are, of course, a very interesting topic. They are a sort of an intersection between property law and family law. Well, you have a very big homework task on wills, and I hope you do that well. If you remember, in that homework, the deadline is sometime in the middle of May. You have to not only go through the English law on that aspect, but there are also a lot of other um, things about wills that may be helpful for you. Just don't overcomplicate it. Yeah, keep it simple, and you and I can live happily ever after. All right. Then there are obligations. Well, that would be called contractual obligations in some countries, law of obligations in others. It often comes under a special area of law, the law of contracts, but because it deals with property, movable or immovable, so we refer to it over here as well. Accession, incorporation, and prescription, very important side topics to keep in mind, but these are in effect the various ways in which ownership can be acquired. And just remember that these are in addition to what was discussed in chapter 1, or rather lecture notes 1. Some concepts of transfer of property by act of parties. This is where, if you remember in the class, we had discussed how things get a little tricky, but you have to be careful about it. So the definition of transfer of property, again from a legal viewpoint, very important. There are some differences of opinion in different jurisdictions as to when real ownership is transferred. So that's one area to keep in mind. Persons competent to transfer, very, very important. This is the most basic aspect. If that person cannot transfer the property, then the whole thing goes out. Condition restraining alienation. Well, these are some of the areas which we discussed in big detail in the classroom, and as you probably understood by then, that these are very important rules, but also very complicating, and well, there's no escaping some of these. Rule against perpetuity, well, that's my personal favorite, so I hope you pay special attention to that, even from the exam point of view. Consider that as a little tip from me. Okay, it's very important to keep this in mind. It's a controversial rule. There are no straightforward answers. Different jurisdictions look at it in different ways, but yeah, as lawyers, you need to be aware of all these things. Interest, in the context of vested interest or contingent interest or conditional transfers or precedents, either conditional precedents or conditional antecedents, whatever these are, you have to be very careful about these things. And we continued on with ulterior transfers and fulfillment of conditions subsequent and ulterior dispositions. Now, all of these may seem very technical. I try to explain them in the context of shares and how companies can deal with those things. But as budding lawyers, as young lawyers, you have a really great opportunity right now during this pandemic, and of course the accompanying economic crisis, which will be coming soon. You will see a lot of areas where these situations come in handy. There is already a lot of talk about force majeure clauses and act of God. Those of you who were unfortunate enough to book airline tickets for your holiday plans in summer, your hotel bookings, Airbnb, booking.com, all of these play a role over here. And these are some things that you can look into in detail. So remember, some of the examples that are given in the lecture notes seem quite simplistic, but the whole idea here is you should be able to use your imagination and consider how shares of companies are treated, or transactions in changing circumstances are treated. And of course, a good lawyer, a successful lawyer, is somebody who can advise his clients or her clients to deal with exceptional situations which nobody expects but which come out of the blue. Just like the coronavirus pandemic. Yeah, nobody ever thought about it. Well, here we are. And of course, there will be a lot of people who may not want to buy a house or real estate transaction or fulfill any contractual obligation to transfer property. And so all of these now play a role over here. So these are some things in lecture 2 which were dealt with. So I hope you look at them in more detail. Remember, it's an open book exam now, so you don't have to memorize anything. As long as you know what is where, you should be okay. Then moving on, maybe we could talk about sales, mortgages, leases, exchanges, and gifts. Again, sale of immovable property in normal circumstances should not be an issue. It's a straightforward transaction. There are certain rights and liabilities, but try to read all of these in the context of what's happening right now. Yeah. So somebody agreed to sell a flat or a house, and your client agreed to buy the house, and that was in February when things were normal. And now you have this crazy global situation, and maybe some people want to postpone the transaction, the transfer of property, the transfer of ownership. Maybe some people are eager to go ahead with it. Maybe there's a liquidity crunch. Maybe some businesses are going bankrupt. And in that situation, of course, it becomes very important to understand how leeway can be achieved. Well, it's not straightforward and simple, as you probably have understood. In fact, I wonder, coming to the next part, which would be lease. Yeah, if you had a long-term lease for a year for your flat in Tallinn, supposing you are from outside Tallinn, and now you cannot live in here for a couple of months already because of all of these pandemic situations. So how would that affect your understanding of the rent process? So that's something to be aware about. Mortgages, again, a very interesting area. A lot of banks are getting very active now, and a lot of bankruptcies, unfortunately, for the bankrupt people, can be a sort of a bonanza for somebody else. So you have a mortgage in a classic storm situation like right now, where a person cannot repay the loan. And already there are talks about how banks could be forced to give extra time or not charge the money for the interest payments, etc., etc. Different types of mortgages, which we can also see out over here, have been discussed. There are rights of the mortgagor, the rights of the mortgagee. As long as you remember that the mortgagee is the bank, or the creditor, you'll be okay. All right, the mortgager is the person who takes the loan. This is a little confusing sometimes, but both have rights and liabilities. The right to redeem, very important. This belongs to the mortgagor. And the right to foreclose. So foreclosure is a very important right for the mortgagee, the bank. And well, keep that in mind. Things will be okay. Then after this, we looked at exchanges and then gifts. So these are areas to be careful about with the definitions. Gift, especially with the keep in mind what we discussed about the engagement ring, or gifts which are given, and once they're given you can't take them back. They cannot be revoked unless there are certain special circumstances. And this is of course where you must remember that in law it's the gray zone area which is the most fascinating and interesting part. The black and white parts you really can't do anything. Yeah, that's what the law says. But then the gray zone is where the fun starts for a lawyer. So I hope you found this to be helpful, and it sort of clarified certain areas of interest for you. There are some examples in the Moodle course page, and there are some homework assignments also mentioned over here. So when you're doing your revision for chapter 2 and lecture notes chapter 3, you can see the requirements for the homeworks as well. Next time, maybe with a different background, I think I'm enjoying it more than I should be. We'll talk about the law of neighbors and the various problems that go with it. This was supposed to be self-study for most of you. We did touch upon a few things in that last hurried class before everybody disappeared because of the pandemic. So maybe I'll spend some time looking at the law of neighbors and explaining some concepts to you. In the meantime, well, take care and stay safe. Goodbye.